You're listening to Out of the Box podcast with Rosie Tran. Out of the Box is sponsored by hugmetees.com. Spread love, give a hug, hugmetees.com. Guys, we love the positive comments on iTunes. Check out of the Box on iTunes and leave a positive comment. It's so easy. All you do is go on iTunes, sign up and put your ID in and username if you're already an iTunes user, and look for Out of the Box podcast and put a positive review. And also click on the subscribe button. It really does help us to get more listeners and spread the word about the podcast. So if you're a fan and you haven't been able to donate money to the podcast, subscribing is a great way. And sometimes I know a lot of you listeners will only click on people that you know and guests that you're familiar with. But, you know, sometimes there's a guest that you haven't heard of and they'll be absolutely amazing and surprise you. So go on iTunes and click on the subscribe button and learn about all of the interesting people that I bring to you guys. Today, I'm very excited to have an author and life coach. He has his own podcast called The Amiel Show. Amiel Handelsman. Amiel, how are you?
I'm great, and I'm probably one of the guests that your listeners have not heard of yet.
Well, let's change that.
And whether they're pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised is to be determined. And I do pronounce it Amiel, and 9 out of 10 people take 99 tries to get it right. So we're cool.
Okay,
It's
Amiel. I'm
three
sorry.
syllables. Yeah, hey, no problem.
I
thought I'd
actually
mention it
listened
early on.
to a couple episodes of your podcast and listened to the intro like 3 or 4 times because there's another guest that I had on, Chris Sharon, and Sharon, that doesn't sound hard to pronounce, right?
Sharon.
Sharon. He's Italian, and for some reason in my mind, I kept calling him Chris Sharoni.
Aha. And how did he like that?
He thought it was really funny, and actually we're really good friends. But for some reason, I couldn't. Actually, I think I'm saying it wrong now. I think it's Cerrone. It's Italian. It's not complicated. I don't know why I had so many issues with it. I messed it up on the podcast like 4 times, and I've actually been on his podcast and messed it up on his podcast.
Well, you want to know something funny? Here's the funny thing about me is that I actually, when I was born and grew up, my family pronounced my name differently, and Amiel. And when I decided to leave the Midwest, Michigan, and move out to the West Coast, you know, you got to do something different. And people change their clothing, they change their name, you know, who knows what they do, change their profession. Well, I kept my clothing for the most part, kept my name, kept my profession, but I changed the pronunciation of my name. I thought that was a fair kind of in the middle. Keep the family name, but change the pronunciation.
Okay,
Put my parents for a loop, though.
Let's get it right so that everyone can, so the listeners who want to follow you after this amazing podcast can find you. And I'll have links to his website and everything. And let's make sure Rosie doesn't sound like a complete idiot. So what is the new pronunciation?
Okay, it's Amiel. It's
Amiel.
3 syllables.
Okay. Were your parents upset about that?
They were confused. And they were really confused because I had to, and this is something I don't encourage people to do in organizations, the whole carrot and stick. But there was a period of time where whenever I have 4 parents, 2 step-parents, whenever any of them would, first I said, you owe me a quarter if you pronounce it the old way. And then that was kind of the stick. And then I said, all right, I'm going to give you a quarter every time you get it right. And then they weren't doing so well, so I had to increase it to $1.
So you're actually kind of like Prince. You're like the artist formerly known as.
Yes. Yeah, but I don't have the symbol. And I started it was like giving them an allowance, and pretty much I'd paid back all the allowance I'd gotten over all those years. And then I said, enough of this. Say it however you want.
Okay. Well, so that's fun. Are you, now that's a very interesting name. Are you Middle Eastern Jewish?
I'm Jewish.
Jewish. Okay.
Jewish and Michigan. Kind of like Middle Eastern, Michigan.
That's a little bit different than the New York Jewish or California Jewish, right?
I do, but I've coached. I'm a leadership coach, and I've coached some Israelis and Middle Easterners, and I say to the people who are, I'm kind of, because often they're trying to get along with Americans, and Americans are trying to get along with the Israelis in the Middle East. It's just a different culture. And I say, look, I'm perfect. I'm Jewish American. I get I'm kind of halfway between Israeli and then the rest of America. It's worked out pretty well.
So you're in the middle, and we're from the Midwest, so you're really American.
I'm right. Yeah,
the
really.
heartland.
Well, you're from you grew up in New Orleans, right? Isn't that real America too?
New Orleans is a very
Not so much.
unique, different world. In fact, there was a lot of things that I kind of had culture shock when I left. So that was different for me because it's a very unique melting pot down there, and it's very French, more French, and people love French culture down there. And I remember the first time I heard a negative stereotype about the French, I thought the person was being joking, like in a bad way. I thought, is this for real? Because there's that American stereotype that Americans don't like the French and everything, and they're and I just thought that was like a kind of like this outdated stereotype. And I met someone that actually had that viewpoint, and I couldn't believe it because not only does the New Orleans and Louisiana culture just absolutely adore the French, but even though we were imperialized for 100 years from the French, the Vietnamese love the French, and so there's a lot of French ties. And I just thought that was completely silly when I heard that stereotype for the first time. So there was a lot of culture shock for me when I left because it's the South, but it's not really the South. It's kind of like the Portland of the South. But let's talk about you, because that's what we're here for. So,
well, that's the funny thing, because I do interviews too, so we could easily fall into the opposite. But yeah, let's talk about.
You're trying to interview me? No, I'm here to
sorry,
interview you.
I fucked up. If I can say that. All right, yeah. What are we gonna talk about here?
Okay, so you're a life coach, and you have a book out called Practicing Greatness. You have 2 books out, correct?
Yes, I've got 2 books. One is an ebook. The other one is in soft copy. What do we call that? Paperback.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real. Practice Greatness. That's the big hefty one that has a lot of meaty content in it. The other one is a compilation of essays. That's an ebook, and that's called Leading When You're Ticked Off.
Well, first of all, that sounds very interesting because a lot of times a leader needs to be cool and calm and collected and we all have emotional buttons and other things that stress us out. So, what are some of your suggestions for people who are in a stressful situation that need to be focused on their goal?
Well, I think and Fast Company picked up the title chapter, which I was really happy to see. So one of the things is really to know what it is that triggers you, that ticks you off. And often there's kind of a handful of things. For some of us, it's if we think someone is just lying, just totally bullshitting us, that just really gets us angry. For other people, it's when someone is criticizing me, and there's a whole range. My big thing is I don't like to be interrupted. Now you can interrupt me, but for some reason,
I'll be quiet.
I don't know why. Yeah, that's no. You feel free. It's your prerogative. But or when I feel like someone doesn't trust me, like, come on, you don't trust me. You think I'm dishonest or not good. So you got to know what it is. Then when you know what it is, it's like a little early indicator. It's like a little light that goes off. And you go, I am now at risk of doing whatever it is that I usually do. And that's the second thing is, what do you usually do? Do you like sulk? Do you throw pens at people or food?
A lot of people shut down, when their buttons are being pushed. If someone makes you feel like, for example, in your situation, like they don't trust you, some people I know do actually shut down and they can't function. It's like their brain gets the synapses kind of have a, malfunction, like a robot that can't move.
Happens a lot, and it's often very visible in the face and in the body, and everybody else knows it, so you can't fake it. Now, there are certain things that you can do, and this is what the Fast Company article, I really talked about them, and so there's some very simple things. One is that you just give yourself a little pause, okay? And that doesn't mean that you have to leave the call or leave the room. A few deep breaths. And what that does is it affects your brain, and it helps the thinking part of your brain regain a little bit of control. Another great thing is to actually go and clarify what the other person has said. So you go, okay, so you're saying that, and that has 2 benefits. One, if the other person has said something that really ticks you off, make sure you heard it correctly, and you may have heard it incorrectly. 2, when they hear you saying it back to them, they say, oh, whoa, no, I didn't mean that. And 3, you buy time. And there's nothing better when you're ticked off than buying yourself a little bit of time.
Because you're giving your brain time to kind of adjust out of reaction mode into actually being back into yourself. Is that correct?
That's right. And we have three brains, three parts of the brain. We have the reptilian brain.
The reptilian brain.
Yeah. You love that reptilian. Do you have a reptilian brain?
We all do. And unfortunately, we should try. Well, we shouldn't have to do anything, but I try to live more not in that part of my brain.
Yes.
So let's explain. Well, if you don't mind explaining the parts of the brain, you sound like you have it a very layman's terms of explanation, and I'm interrupting you.
I don't think you did. So three parts of the brain. Yeah, this is very basic. So basically, the brain has evolved over time, and there was the reptilian brain, which is very instinctual, which is that fight, flee, or freeze brain. And then once once organisms evolved beyond reptiles, then you have the emotional brain, which I believe is the mammal brain, and then you have the thinking brain, which is pretty special to human beings. And so basically the lower brain hijacks the higher brain when we get upset. And it's kind of a nice thing to know because you realize you're not screwed up. The other person isn't screwed up. You can actually describe it physiologically. And I had a great guest on my show named Janet Crawford, who was on episode 1 of the Amiel show. And she's a real neuroscience pro, and she kind of walked everybody through this. But it's just great to know that, it isn't just you. It's part of your brain that's taking over. And just there are things that you can do. Like I said, take a pause, take 3 breaths, take a time out that you can do. I also have one that I call the do-over. So
okay.
The do-over is basically if you catch yourself getting upset, criticize someone, saying you don't understand, you're wrong, you just say, all right, wait, let me rephrase that. What I mean to say is basically you get a second chance.
I think communication is really important. And, we've all heard that, good communication is the key to an effective relationship. Communication. It's so important. And a lot of people, I think, hear that and they're like, well, I know how to talk. I don't understand. What's the problem? But you're saying that it's the way in which we are communicating that really can hit a nerve or soothe a nerve. Is that correct?
It really can. Verbal and body language. I hear from a lot of people when they're talking about someone that they don't get along well with, it's just the other person's facial expression. Mm-hmm. Or it's the crossing of their arms. But the communication, it's one of the things that makes a really big difference.
It is. And, I think that the repeating back is a really good thing because, I don't know if what your experience is with life coaching, but I noticed a lot of people kind of filter what they hear through their own little filters. And sometimes you can say one thing, it can be interpreted multiple ways depending on the person's point of view.
Wonderful point. And I would say it's always interpreted based on the person's point of view. Each of us has our own lens, and we assume that other people see the world like us, but we actually see things very, very differently. You can go to the same movie and you walk out, and everyone has a different experience of it.
Or even they have, those trials where they show footage of, the crime and the witness. There'll be 4 or 5 witnesses with completely different, takes on what happened, right?
Yeah, I was on a jury in San Francisco for 6 weeks, 42 counts, criminal case, and we heard a lot of different versions of what happened. And we had to figure out who was lying, who was telling the truth, and who was actually just giving a different take on the situation. And it's actually one of the really important things in interacting with other people in life and in the workplace is just realizing that the other person sees the world differently from me, and stop assuming that the other person is like you. I have a lot of people I coach who say, well, this is what I would do in this situation, and the other person isn't doing that, so I assume that blank.
They're being rude, or they're being disrespectful, or they don't get it.
Or they're not smart, or they're not reliable. And I always say that's a big rat hole to climb down.
That is one of the most difficult things that I have struggled with. And I'm finally, after 15 years of working on myself, getting through it, where someone will do something that just infuriates me. And I'll tell my husband, well, I just don't get it because, you know, if I was in that situation, I would do this. So I do exactly what you're saying. And I'm finally getting to the point where I'm, able to let go of that and say, okay, they're coming from a different point of view. And just because they're doing something that I disagree with doesn't mean that they're out to get me or that they hate me or whatever. So that's a really, really great point. When you're coaching people, first of all, I strongly encourage everyone to check out your website. And if you're, do you do coaching outside of the Portland area, like via Skype and other things?
I do some. I always like to have a face-to-face first, and I'll clarify. It's funny in the field of coaching. Life coaching is the most famous. Leadership or executive coaching maybe a little less famous, and the people who do leadership coaching are pretty feisty about not being called okay. Life coaches for all sorts of reasons. So yeah. So it's just worth pointing out, and I'm mostly hired by organizations who want to invest in managers, senior managers, et cetera. So I used to work with people kind of out of pocket or people who were trying to figure out where they wanted to go with their career. And for a series of reasons, I said, my biggest interest is in helping people lead effectively within organizations. They could be startup leaders, but it's within an organizational setting.
Now, managers and business executives and CEOs and stuff, obviously, it's great to have a leader who's willing to listen and open-minded and other things, but do you deal with a lot of egos and resistance sometimes in that type of environment?
Egos?
Yes.
In organizations? Oh. No. Never, nowhere do we deal. Do you deal with egos in LA? I mean, we all have egos. I mean, that's just, it's part of the territory and it's fine. Part of it, people need to be open. If you want to learn, I don't want to mess around with someone whose boss wants them to be there, and that's why they're there. And you figure it out pretty quickly. They just don't want to be there. I had one guy, listen to this. This is about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was on the East Coast. And I met with this guy, and we were sitting in this room, and he was like, I don't like it. It was in his building. I was visiting. It was in his building. I don't like the walls in here, and this seat is really uncomfortable. And he had about 8 complaints about the room. And I finally said to him, is it the room or do you actually not want to be having this conversation? And he's like, yeah, I really don't want to be having this conversation. So some people are just not open. 95% of the people that are sent to me, they actually want to do the work. They have a reason. For some of them, it's they want to get a promotion. They want to advance in their career. For many of them, it's actually they really want to be better managers. They want to manage well. It's like being a great artist or engineer or mechanic or stand-up comic. You want to be better at your craft, and it feels good. People like a challenge. Men and women, particularly men, like the challenge of that. And so, most of the people come, ready to roll up their sleeves and do the work. Often the hard part is organizations are such serious places, big companies in particular, and government, and people are moving very quickly. So actually part of my job is what's part of your job, which is to kind of loosen people up and make them laugh. Mm-hmm. Now, not every executive coach does that, but that's what I do. Just whatever it takes to have people kind of relax a little bit. They're much more open. And, as you know, when people laugh,
if someone's at the comedy show with their arms crossed and they look pissed off, it's not going to be a good show.
It's not. Do they ever unlock their arms, or are they pretty much set?
It depends. Sometimes people are just set and they're not able to be broken. Sometimes you can, break people a little bit. I'm not crazy about doing too much crowd work, but I've messed with some people that look, and sometimes it's a judgment. I've told the story before on the podcast, but I had a gentleman one time, he had his arms crossed and he just looked so angry, and the entire show he just looked pissed. And, after the show, he came up to me and he said, I really enjoyed your set. I thought you were very funny. And I was completely taken aback, like, okay, well, then why weren't you laughing? And he just said, I've had a really rough day, and the show was helping me to unwind, and et cetera, et cetera. And so he was going through his own stuff, but he was still able to enjoy the show and really, have a great time. So, sometimes I try not to judge the audience and take it too personal, because most of the time it has nothing to do with me. If someone looks so miserable at the show, but
and that's true everywhere else too.
Yeah, but I've been able to break people. I did a show with a woman in the front audience who absolutely hated me, and I was able to break her by the end of the show. She came in late, and I guess she had tickets for the show in the front row, and you're late, you're disrupting the whole show to kind of go sit in the front. So she kind of disrupted the whole front area to take her seat. And she was, a white woman, and her husband was black. And I made a joke about that. Very, very light joke. Was not, mean spirited or racial or anything at all. And she was rushing to her seat. And I think what happened was she didn't hear the joke. She just heard me making some type of racial comment. Mm-hmm. And took it personal, and then she was just the whole show had her arms crossed and didn't, want to look at me. But I broke her by the end. Wow. I was like, "You're gonna have a good time, lady."
You just decided this is someone I'm gonna work on.
It was, and it was funny because she was actively trying not to laugh. She just had her arms crossed and she was making a sour face, which is very difficult when you're performing. You're staring at this one person just frowning.
Well, I do work in groups, and the same kind of thing can come up as someone whose arms are crossed. They look upset, and you make a great point. As the first thing is, we got to stop thinking it's about me, because it's like that guy that had a bad day. Everybody brings so much in to any setting. Now, it's funny you say you broke her. It sounds like you're doing some kind of a police interrogation. Is that a professional term in stand-up?
It kind of is. I just was focused on her, and I went internally inside of myself. And, because a lot of people think when you do stand-up, oh, it's so easy, you're just up there talking. There's actually multiple processes going on. One, I'm doing my act, my pre-prepared act. Two, I'm surveying the audience. And three, it's actually a lot of things that are going on. You're thinking of your next joke. If something happens, you have to respond to that. And I just kind of focused on sending her a lot of positive energy, if that makes any sense. And I was trying to send her a lot of positive love energy. I mean, it broke sounds very negative, but I really was trying to break her as far as her negative. I mean, she really, I think, thought I said something very negative, and I didn't. Because the way that her face looked when I commented on them being late was just daggers.
Yeah.
So, I just sent her a lot of love and light and focused a lot of energy
Fantastic.
on her. And I think a lot of times people think when you're making a mean face that someone will look away. I actually focused my energy on her. And by the end of the show, she was laughing.
Wow. That's awesome. And maybe it was also the fact that you were funny.
I think so.
I mean, it's nice to think that the loving energy works, and I'm definitely for that, but you never know. The nice thing about my job as compared to yours in stand-up is nobody expects to laugh when they're with me. It would be like if people came to your show and then afterwards they got a promotion. It's a pleasant surprise.
Well, I think it's great when you're dealing with open people. Obviously, that's the easy part. I want to talk about these difficult people because I think more, it's like a relationship, right? When things are going in the relationship well, of course, things are wonderful. Everyone's happy. But I think it's in times of conflict, in a marriage or maybe in a relationship with family members where our personality is truly tested. So, say you're in a session, you're coaching an executive session, and someone is closed-minded or difficult or hard to deal with. I think a lot of times in the business world, in our daily lives and work and careers and other things, we have to deal with that difficult person. So what are some of the things that you do personally, in your career to help others maybe deal with difficult people in their lives or in their work environment?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think we all have these experiences, and what I would, and there are a lot of books like How to Deal with Difficult People, or I think there's one called The No Asshole Rule.
I like that.
Very popular. It was actually from a Stanford professor who's kind of a genius in his line of work. And anyways, so there's, we all have these conversations, these relationships that we just feel like crap. And we can call them difficult people. I would call them difficult relationships because often we are, what's the word I'm looking for? We're contributing to it. We're co-conspirators in why things go wrong. Now, we may be only contributing a little bit. We may be aiding and abetting the crime, and they're the murderer in the relationship.
Okay.
And we're just we're the accomplice. So I think the first thing to do is to understand what it is about them that bothers you, because some of the times it's how we interpret things, like we said. So we want to just, first of all, separate out people who are being assholes from we're just being bothered by someone who's actually well-intended. And then if we actually feel like that person is malintended or really abusive or out to get us, and there's evidence for that, we've checked it out, that's a whole different ball of wax. Okay, so we kind of got to ask, how pivotal is this person to my happiness or success?
Okay.
Really important question. I see people who spend a lot of time dealing with folks that are out, unpleasant to them, or they don't need that person. How much do you actually need that person? And why do you think you need them? So this might be kind of I wrote an article called How to Make Peace with Your Enemies. But one of the things is there are some enemies that you don't have to make peace with. You have to make peace inside of yourself, so you're not carrying them around in your belly.
And then get away from them, right?
The back of your neck. Yeah, and get away from them. I remember people, this is ridiculous, but I've worked with people who they say, I have to pass that person in their cubicle all the time, and I just feel so sick when I pass them. And they say, well, are they important to your work? Not really. Is there more than one path back to where you work? Yes. Why don't you just walk a different direction?
It sounds so simple.
Oh, wow. This is why people pay me, but so sometimes we just need to redirect, take a different path. Sometimes we actually do need to mend our relationship with, but we have to ask why. Why does this person matter to me, and why do I matter to this other person? Forget about mechanics and techniques. You got to have a reason why. And once you know why, that gives you the oomph, the chutzpah, whatever you want to call it, to actually take some action. Otherwise, why bother? Like anything, why bother? It's too hard.
Yeah, you're
So
saying it's not worth the effort. If it's not worth the effort, just forget about it, right?
If it's a sibling, your parent, a significant other, someone who's an important work relationship, I'd say, get the fuck on it. Try and mend that relationship, And part of it is to really understand what you're contributing, what the other person is contributing. And then there's all sorts of methods. But part of it is you got to come in curious and go like, I wonder what I'm contributing. I wonder what the pattern is here. Is it something where I need to give the other person some feedback? Is it where I need to make myself open to feedback? I can go on and on, but let me tell you one of my favorite practices.
Okay.
I call it my side of the story, your side of the story. And it's not going in and beating the other person on the head with what they've done wrong. It's also not just walking in and saying, beat me on the head. It's, I want to have a conversation about what's going on here. Let me tell you my side of the story or my take. Then you can give me your side of the story or your take. And then let's make sure we've heard each other and then call it a conversation. Don't try and solve a frickin' thing. Just try and reach mutual understanding. And I have to tell you, I found a lot of people get a lot of value from that. And you got to frame it that way up front. You can't go in saying, hey, I want to tell you about what this thing you did and why it bothers me. You have to say, I want to tell you my side of the story and let me hear yours. Or even better, I want to talk to you about the situation. Tell me your side, then I'll tell you mine. Are you willing to have this conversation? You have to ask. If you just plunge in, bad things can happen. Are you willing to have it? And then
asking for permission first.
Is this a good time? And if it's not they may say yes, but it may be a crappy time. Maybe they have a deadline. Maybe something's on their mind. Maybe they just had some, bad news in their life. Don't assume it's a good time just because it's a good time for you. All right, that was a mouthful.
No. That's very good information, and I think a lot of people can find value from it. What about people who you're forced to work with or be around for whatever reason, or maybe they're family members, like you said, and they're just not open? I mean, is it best to just avoid? Or, I mean, I know, for example, my husband, he was working very closely with someone on a daily basis who, it was well-intentioned. The gentleman was well-intentioned, but he was always correcting him. And, my husband is a very competent and confident person, and he doesn't need to constantly be corrected. And he would come home feeling worn down, saying, honey, this guy just constantly, and it was a colleague, it was not someone above him. He's like, this guy just constantly corrects me. Oh, you're doing it wrong. It needs to be done like this. It should be done like this. It needs to be done like this. And, he told the guy, he tried everything. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And this and that. I'm competent. And the guy just kept doing that. And I've heard that from a couple other people, coworkers, who constantly need to prove themselves or correct or prove you wrong. I mean, what do you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, I won't give him since he might be listening to this, I don't want to give a specific instruction to him, but just some guidelines. First of all is realize that the other person is probably doing what they do with many people with you. It's kind of how they do things.
Mm-hmm. Like that's just their personality?
Yeah, kind of. And I have this mentor in the field who used to kind of joke that, let's say the person's name is Bob. You just look at Bob and you go, you're bobbing. Like this person is just doing the Bob thing. And sometimes it can take the charge out of it. And you go, I don't have to take it personally. He's just bobbing. Right? That's just what he does. So that's one thing. You could actually see if he's open to a conversation about about how you're working together, a give and take of feedback. Now that's a little that takes a little bit of audacity. Mm-hmm. And then if you do that and he's open to it, and you say, well, listen, let me just tell you about something that happens. I want to tell you my side of the story, then tell me your side of the story. Sound familiar?
Yes.
So my side of the story is I know you're very committed to improving things, and I noticed that when I do X, you do Y. Don't come up with adjectives like you criticize me. You say when I said this, you said that. Be very specific, so it's a fact that nobody could argue with.
Because people can get defensive, correct?
Yeah, just say it somewhat neutrally, and you kind of say, "Yeah, I wanted to just tell you, when I hear that, it kind of feels pretty good. I assume you have good intentions, but so tell me your side of the story." Just like that. And if the guy isn't open to that conversation, well, then then you go to door B.
And what is door B?
Well, when you come home at the end of the day, tell your wife, who's funny, to tell you a joke and cheer you up. And if your wife can't, what was the term again? Break you. Break you, then you got to go to door C. I'm not quite sure what that is.
Okay. I was just wondering because I had heard that, and I had also, I have friends who have also had people that are, I don't know if it comes from insecurity, if it's a projection, like to just constantly be correcting others. I actually have a cousin like that who's just always correcting people and saying, oh, this is how it should be done. And usually it's just, their point of view. It's obviously things don't need to be done a certain way. So it's just very interesting, all the different personality types out there.
It's very interesting. And I'm a big fan of a personality approach called the Enneagram, which is 9 personality types. And unlike many, it doesn't just stick you in a box. It describes the box that we stick ourselves in every day, mm-hmm. and how to get out. And one of those Enneagram types, it's ENNEAGRAM, is called The Perfectionist. And the basic storyline here is there's a lot of things messed up in the world. Many other people don't see that they're messed up. I do. So my job is to point them out.
Okay.
That's my job in life. And they may be things that I've done, quote unquote, wrong. They may be things that are, quote unquote, wrong outside. But it's actually my mission in life to make things right. And it feels good to do that. And actually, I have a really good discernment. Now, the lesson for this type, so if this guy, who we've called Bob, whatever, don't say the name.
Trust me, he's not listening. He's not listening.
If Bob is listening, if Bob's on my mailing list somehow and is getting this.
He said, "Hey, that's me. I know Rosie's husband."
If Bob happens to be a coaching client of mine, which basically says I'm a shitty coach because this is happening. But if he's listening, the thing to do is, what was I just talking about?
You're talking about his personality type.
His personality type.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the path out is to go. There's a difference between being discerning and being critical. The discernment is a great strength. It's to be able to say, here's what my internal standard is. Here's what you did. They're different. It's another thing to say that what you did is wrong or it doesn't match up. But just for Bob to recognize in his mind, there's a difference. It's a difference between saying blue is a different color than red and blue is better than red.
Got it. There is a distinction there, and those distinctions matter. And that's why, back to the beginning where I said communication is so important. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I know how to talk. What's the difference if I say it like this or say it like that? And you're saying that it can trigger certain buttons or make people comfortable or uncomfortable, depending on the way you're communicating.
It can contribute to it. Now, each of us, another important point is everybody generates their own emotions. Now, it sounds kind of crazy, but it's actually really helpful that if somebody else is getting upset, they're angry, they're sad, they're frustrated, they go quiet. One of the reasons it bothers us is that somewhere inside of us, we feel responsible for what's happening. And so we want to fix it. We want to get rid of it. We don't feel comfortable being around them. But if we can look at that other person and go, like I said, they're bobbing or they're Amieling or they're Rosieing or whatever it is, they're generating their own stuff. I'm not responsible for that. That can create a lot of got that off my back.
I think that is a really great distinction and so important because I think in our society there's this romantic idea of you can make someone happy or you can make someone, whatever, right? You marry the right person, they can make you happy or they can make you upset if you marry the wrong person. And what you're saying is so, so important is that we are all responsible for our own emotions. And that's something that I absolutely love because it gives you a lot of power and gives you a lot of power to your own happiness.
It really does. And there's a flip side of it, which is that I generate my own emotions. So that if I'm upset, I'm not holding someone else responsible.
It's not their fault. It's
you need to do X, Y, and Z so that I feel better. No, I may have some requests of you, but you're not responsible for my emotions. That's my deal here. And then there's like two ways that we usually go with our emotions. One of them you referred to earlier is we shut down. Just shut it down. We kind of push it down. We repress it. We depress it. And another way is that we act it out. And a third way is just to feel it, know we've got it, maybe even find some healthy expression for it, but not dump it on other people. There's this thing in some people are in organizations around men and women. Men men tend to get more angry. You got to deal with your anger. I think anger is very healthy. It's when it gets used in an unhealthy way. Because anger, if you actually feel it in your body, you get fired up.
It can be it can be a powerful motivator.
Yeah, just feel the heat of it. Feel that heat, and all of a sudden you're just ready to roll. But if you just let it get out and you're dumping it on people who don't deserve it, or even who do deserve it, still it's just not so good. I'm just kidding. Nobody deserves it.
Some
Yes,
people deserve it a little bit.
yes, they do. No, they do.
That is very important, and I think that type of emotional intelligence is not taught to the level that I am happy with in our current society. But people like you who are explaining it and explaining how it can be healthy is a good thing, and especially for men, I notice that a lot of societies and cultures don't really allow men to express their anger. There's a fear of it. I think, always control your emotions. I hear that a lot from men, be a big boy. A lot of people teach their kids that. Don't show that you're upset or angry. And you're saying that anger is a very positive, can be a very positive thing if used constructively.
Yeah. And I just interviewed someone on my podcast who just wrote a book called To Be a Man, Robert Augustus Masters. And he makes a distinction between anger, aggression, and violence. And obviously, the further you go along there, the worse it is. But anger in itself is we've got to have some way of at least feeling it. And we had a whole conversation about why so many men are attracted to the movie Fight Club. It's because it's like, there's that raw, primal part of me that just wants to somehow get expressed. And and that's what that movie was about. It was about people agreeing to basically beat each other up. And I think it's why a lot of people, men and women, were pretty pissed off about this recent fight of the century that happened, where there really were very few punches that were landed because people want that raw aggression.
They want to see the Greek or Roman kind of fighting in the pit, right?
Yeah. Now, I'm not advocating for aggression, but I'm advocating for feel the anger, feel the heat of it, and let it animate something positive that you want to do in the world, whatever that is.
I think that's a very, very good point. And I think it's important for people to not deny their emotions, but channel them into a constructive, or positive outlet, because so many people are afraid of their emotions. And, there's a lot of stuffing down. And I think a lot of people think, oh, if I just stuff it down, I won't have to deal with it or it'll never come up. And I've met, people in their 60s and 70s who, I was dealing with a gentleman who had his had a lot of emotions pushed down, and he thought, well, and he went into counseling and other things because his marriage was having issues. I think he was in a 30-year marriage, and he said, wow, all these issues came up from my childhood that I thought, I never dealt with it, but I thought, hey, it's over. It's been 30, 40, 50 years, whatever. It's not a big deal anymore. And those issues were coming up in his marriage. And I think that happens to a lot of people where they think, oh, no big deal. Everyone has a bad childhood or everyone has issues and I don't need to deal with it. And then it kind of rears its ugly head somewhere else.
Yeah, unexpectedly.
And people think it's totally unrelated, but I think that's just silly thinking, because of course something that happened to you in your most innocent and developmental stage is going to affect you later in life. So
it's a really nice point. And not only will it affect you later in life, but it creates a series of habits that if you do them thousands of times, that becomes who you are.
That's
every
good.
time you want to cry as a man or a woman, but every time you feel sad, you want to cry. And when you were a kid, you were told, suck it up, chin up, boys
be a
don't
man,
cry,
whatever. Yeah.
Be a man or be a boy or whatever it is. And you learn not to cry. It's not just that affects you when you're 30. It's that you have a habit of pushing that down for years. And I can tell you from my own experience that I don't know that I was ever told to suck it up or anything like that by my parents. But just by the culture, I really didn't cry very much. Mm-hmm. And I still don't cry a lot. But I have to tell you, when I do, oh my God, what a relief. What a relief. It's like, people pay $50, $100 for a massage. Crying is free.
That is
so much
so
shit
true.
that just comes out. I mean, it's
It is a release. It's a
such a
catharsis.
relief.
It's a catharsis, and I've had that too. And I'm a crier. I totally cry. But that happened to me recently, where I was really frustrated in my life, and I was just really frustrated, and I was kind of. And I don't usually do this because I'm a crier, but I was kind of denying myself, okay, I can handle this. And I don't need to cry over it. And it sounds so cliche, but I just had a good cry hugging my puppy. And I was on a high afterwards. I felt puking out, you're puking out bad, food or something. I was I feel so much better.
Yeah, and it's probably better than eating, my favorite, the triple scoop of ice cream or whatever it is that you would otherwise,
To stuff your
or
emotions, right?
different kinds of drugs, and or there's lots of ways that lots of things we do to substitute for actually, feeling that emotion. And one thing I've noticed that's pretty interesting, for the men listening who really don't want to cry, just cut up some onions. It'll at least I'm serious. It makes your eyes tear, and that feels a little bit better.
And then you're able to start the process, right?
And then you can just, someone says, hey, buddy, what are you doing? Crying? Fuck that. I was just making some onions for my burger. So I'm being facetious. I'm being stupid, but it actually has been helpful.
But here's the thing is that there's a reason, right? So, if you believe in God, God made you a certain way. If you believe in science or whatever, there's an evolutionary reason for these things. And it's healthy, right? If you go to a funeral or you have a horrible situation happen to you or a breakup and you go out drinking or do whatever you do to avoid it, you're not actually doing yourself any type of service. It's normal to cry after someone dies. It's totally healthy to cry after you've been through a breakup. That is part of the healing process that evolution or God or whatever has installed in our DNA to help us. We don't just do random stuff. Things are created for a reason. And so to deny yourself that in a time of grief is actually extremely unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah. This brings me to my dream last night, which I want to tell you about. So one of my favorite movies is Swingers, which is filmed in your city there with Vince Vaughn,
yes,
Jon Favreau, Heather Graham. So I had this dream last night, maybe because I just heard an interview with Jon Favreau on another podcast. By the way, John, if you're listening, call me. About his movie Chef or The Chef. And
yes, I've seen both,
this dream, and I just love that movie so much. My dream last night was that we were playing soccer with each other, and he was trying to score a goal, and I was trying to block it, and we kind of hit it off and became friends, which is very cool. But what it reminds me of is that movie starts with a breakup, and it's with a guy that's kind of in the dumps, and his friend Vince Vaughn's character tries to cheer him up. I think they go to Vegas. They go to
Vegas.
They go to Vegas, and he says a stupid joke about Kansas, and then he ends up kind of in this van with this woman, and they could hook up, but he kind of just like pours his heart out. He's not ready for that. Like that wasn't, Vegas really wasn't an appropriate response for where he was dealing with. Mm-hmm. Although, it was a nice effort. And so then he goes home, and I think that he kind of mopes around for a long time and maybe cries. I don't really know exactly what he's doing. They don't show up, but he kind of eats like shit, I think, and he doesn't turn on any lights. So that's not so great, but he's going through something. And then when they say, all right, we're going out tonight, he's at least a little more ready for it. And then he's kind of real. By the end of the movie, he's kind of real. And when he goes up to Heather Graham's character and she says like, I don't know, how are you doing? He says something like, I'm feeling like shit. And she laughs. He's like, really? Somehow he's gotten, maybe I'm exaggerating this because I'm thinking about the movie, but there's something you got to go through to be ready to be on your game. And he had to go through that. And part of it was also his buddy saying, you're so money and you don't even know it.
And you have to experience the experience. That's part of life. It's like people want to avoid pain. Well, that's part of life. Pain is life. Not saying that pain is all life. There's also joy and happiness and passion and all these awesome, amazing emotions. But pain is also a part of life. And I think, the better that we deal with it and learn how to deal with it is healthier than just saying, I can't deal with that. Well, that's part of life.
It's very interesting to say. Now, one of the reputations, I'm going to ask you a question, of stand-up comics is that they're funny because they're unhappy. And now you have this show where you're interviewing people and obviously have a different perspective than, hey, let's be unhappy. And so I wonder, are you an exception to the rule?
I am an exception, but I don't have to be an exception. So the formula for comedy is pain or uncomfortability, which a lot of people don't understand. So for example, if someone farts, right, usually we laugh because it's very uncomfortable. The person's embarrassed. There's some type of shame or embarrassment there. So laughter is actually a reaction. And because people say, oh, what is funny? What makes something funny? And, I've been doing stand-up for 12 years and I have a lot of comedian friends and some who have been doing it 20, 30 years. what is funny is always it's a reaction, kind of like burping, believe it or not. You're laughing to let out tension. So, if something's very uncomfortable and if something's, painful, and there's always a victim in comedy, unfortunately. So something to make fun of. So there's a lot of negative aspects of comedy. And what you're doing is you're either bringing light to something or you're making fun of it to be able to process it or deal with it better. So actually comedy can be a very positive thing, but most comedians are very unhappy people. And I think that's the first stage of comedy. And I think that many comedians, unfortunately, do not evolve out of that, which is why many of them commit suicide or have, extreme drug use, which is very sad. And I feel like there's an evolution of comedy. And that's the very first stage of comedy, is just taking your misery and somehow transforming it into something positive. Now, I think that, life is a game and we can get to the next level by learning more personal awareness about ourselves and about those around us. And that's how we kind of get to the next video game level of life, right? And so I think a lot of comedians have not evolved out of that very basic level. And they may be brilliant, funny comedians, but they don't evolve out of that into the second level, which is transforming that into joy. We are joy machines. Like, I have the most awesome job ever. I get to go out there and take something, negative or horrible or silly or, crazy about society and make it into a positive and make people laugh. And, the great Joan Rivers understood this very well, even though she was, very depressed as well. She said that. She said, "Hey, I'm making light out of something horrible so that you can understand it and enjoy it." And so I think that there's a very positive side to comedy as well that some comedians have unfortunately not evolved into. But I've also seen comedians evolve into it, and I love that. I love when I see a comedian who really understands what our purpose here is, to bring light and joy and take something absolutely awful and make it positive. So,
love it.
Yeah, I think I am the exception, though. Unfortunately, the comedy scene can be a bit negative, and I don't like that. And I've had comics tell me that, well, you're just too positive to be a comic. I don't think you're a real comic. And then, they'll say, okay, well, you're really funny, but that's weird. That's not normal. And
Do you ever have, yeah.
So,
sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Do you ever have people that come to your shows and if you see them afterwards, they say, yeah, very funny, but you're bringing a little bit too much love.
I don't. The main thing that I get is I get a lot of male fans who say, well, I don't really think women are funny, but I thought you were funny, which is kind of a backhanded compliment a little bit.
Yeah.
But I don't take it personal. What I usually say to them is, well, now you know a funny woman and you get to think women are funny.
Yeah.
So I think every person has the capacity to be funny. And I think that's absolutely silly. And comedy is very much a craft. I really do think it's a craft. A lot of people think to be funny, you have to be very talented. But, once you observe people and figure out the structure of it, it's very not easy. It's always, difficult and a struggle and challenge, but it's very easy to find the humor in things. And you do start to get a little twisted because you see humor in things that the average person doesn't see sometimes. So sometimes I'm laughing in movies when no one else is laughing, or, So I want to talk to you for like another hour, but we have to wrap up soon. You have given us a lot of gems, a lot of gemstones.
Did we talk about Bob for too long?
No, we didn't. We didn't talk about Bob for too long. I don't think he is listening to this show. I've met Bob, and I don't think Bob is a podcast fan, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. All right. I guess that's good, maybe, or bad.
But so do you have any tidbits of knowledge to drop out there, advice for people who are listening who might, want to learn more about, communication or emotional intelligence or any other drops of, diamonds in the rough before we start wrapping it up?
Well, of course, I'm supposed to plug my book, which is called Practice Greatness, Escape Small Thinking, Listen Like a Master, Lead with Your Best. It's available on Amazon and nowhere else. Exclusively on Amazon.
Let's talk about that really, really quick before we wrap up. Listening. So you're saying how to listen. A lot of people think listening is a passive activity. You're just listening to the person, you're like just being there as someone who is, a ear or a shoulder to lean on. But listening is actually a very active activity. Is that correct?
It's active. And the one point that I make in my book in a chapter on listening is it's not enough just to tilt your head 20 degrees to the side and nod and maybe smile or shed a tear at the right moment. Although, those are all fine if they're genuine. The key to being a really great listener is to know what is getting in the way of your listening to the other person. In other words, what is distracting you? What are the thoughts? What are you obsessed with? Like the person who's always seeing what's wrong out there. That is, it's hard to hear another person when all you're doing is looking for what's wrong, or in another case, what could go wrong, or in another case, they have something that I don't have. It's very distracting. So if you can start to become aware of what I call the listening filter that keeps you from actually being present with another person, that's golden. One other thing piece of advice is go ahead and get some feedback from people around you. And when I'm married, I've got a couple kids right now, but when I was single and wondering what was going on in my dating life, I actually wanted to be in a relationship. I had a friend who challenged me to go and interview women that I had dated before
and find out what went wrong.
Find out, yeah. So I asked them. I called them up. In some cases, it had been a couple years. In some cases, it had been a month or two. Some cases, I had gone out with them for 6 months or 6 days. I mean, it really varied. But I asked them, the assignment was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how present was I with you? And what would I need to do differently to get to a 10? Second question was, how sexy was I with you? And what would it take to get to a 10?
I love that. I love that.
Now, we don't have time to talk about what I learned, but, it took some balls to do that. But I'll tell you what, it was extremely helpful. It was extremely helpful. I learned a lot of stuff. The things that I thought were a turnoff, they couldn't give a crap about. And things that actually mattered, some of these women, like the fact that I had bare white walls in my apartment, they actually said I felt so uncomfortable. It was so stark. I didn't want to be there. And plus I had plaid shirts that they didn't like, which I had no idea about.
Did you see that you were making certain similar patterns in all these relationships?
Definitely some patterns. And one of the patterns I found in the interviews is they were relieved to give the feedback. And what I said to them, and this is the other tip for listeners, whether you're interviewing ex-girlfriends or boyfriends or just friends or family, is you got to say, I'm going to ask you questions, ask clarifying questions, take notes, and that's it. You got to promise not to disagree, not
or
to
get
argue,
mad, right? No, I didn't do that.
Well, you can say, this may be hard for me to hear, so my face might scrunch up. I might frown, be warned, but I still take it seriously. So you give the person a little heads up that, yeah, it may be uncomfortable. But yeah, you don't say, I disagree, that's wrong, your memory is wrong. You just say, tell me more, and then what happened next, and what was that like for you? And then write it down. Take some notes. And I had one woman that I called. She said to me at the very beginning of the conversation, she says, look, it's lucky you called me today and not next week because I'm about to write you off of my life.
Oh, my gosh.
So I caught her just in time.
Wow. That is an amazing tool because I think a lot of people get into breakups and they think, oh, well, either one, oh, it just didn't work out, or two, it was that other person, it wasn't me, or they make a general judgment about the opposite sex. Oh, men are like this, that's why I can't find someone, or women are like this, that's why I can't find someone, or women or men are only after XYZ. And so this is giving actual constructive feedback on what you're doing that is not working, right?
Yeah. In any context of your life, again, it takes courage, it takes strength, and it takes skill to do it. And do it carefully. Don't go talk to people. Only talk to people who you think have your best interests at heart. Mm-hmm. Don't talk to people who want to do you in. That's a waste of time. Mm-hmm. And when I do my stakeholder interviews, which is basically when I'm working with coaching a leader, I interview 5-10 people that work with them. One of the first questions I ask is, are you willing to let go of the past? I didn't make up this question. I got it from someone else. But if they say no, which doesn't almost never happen, then I would say, thanks, no need for the interview.
Very
What's
good.
the point? They gotta want the person to succeed and grow. So that's a good thing you don't want to go to someone that hates you and ask the questions.
What did I do wrong? Everything.
Right. And I almost was on that turf with this particular gal. Luckily, I got in time.
Well, I think that is, the golden piece in the episode. That is very, very good advice. And how can people find you online on Twitter? Obviously, I'll have your website on the Out of the Box podcast website so people can find you as well. But anything upcoming or any on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle?
It's my full name, Amiel Handelsman, Amiel Handelsman. Website is amielhandelsman.com. And
your book on Amazon.
My book is, and I have the other book is called Leading When You're Ticked Off, which is on a Kindle book on Amazon. And you can go on to Fast Company, and they publish 2 of my articles.
Awesome.
Just look up Fast Company and then type it's amazing being on. I love Fast Company. They have like 2,000 people that forward it, which is a few more than my blog.
That is amazing. Guys, check him out online, follow him on Twitter, find out all the latest information, buy his book, and support him, because there is a lot of good information, and you've heard just a small, very small slice of that on this podcast. Please visit our sponsor, hugmetees.com. Spread love, give a hug, hugmetees.com. I'm telling you, if you buy a Hug Me Tea, you will get hugged. I, wear mine all the time, and I get hugs from strangers. If you're a single guy, gal, it's a great way to meet people and spread the love. And as always, we are on Stitcher, iTunes, and SoundCloud. SoundCloud.com/outoftheboxpodcast. If you enjoy the podcast, you can go on our website, outoftheboxpodcast.com, and click on the donate button. We are now accepting Litecoins and Bitcoins and all alternative currency. Follow me on Twitter @FunnyRosie, and this has been Out of the Box Podcast with Rosie Tran.